Robin, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. We have actually a very large group joining us from quite a large geographic range, so welcome, and thank you for taking time today to talk about product excellence. I'm the VP and General Manager of the SIIA Software Division, and Robin is the Director of Research for Free Pint. And we are joined here today by four individuals who represent the buy side and the sell side of product excellence. And I want to just quickly introduce them. Scott Livingston is with LexisNexis, and he serves as the Vice President of Public Records and Government Solutions for LexisNexis U.S. legal markets. And in his current role, Scott is responsible for the public records, analytical, and legal content for LexisNexis's U.S. legal markets, as well as the products built upon those content sets. And Northcott is with Export Development Canada. EDC provides Canadian exporters with financing, insurance, and bonding services, as well as foreign market expertise, and Anne manages roughly about 250 content vendors. Next is Cindy Studnicka, and she's the Americas leader for external content procurement for the Ernst & Young organization, and Ann Kenny is the Americas leader for acquired external content for the Ernst & Young organization. And I got to tell you, when we've sat together preparing for this, it was very insightful for me just hearing what people have to say, and I'm real anxious to hear your comments and questions throughout the webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Robin just to walk through a few of the details in terms of today's agenda. Robin.
Yes, thank you. So to keep in mind a couple of pieces, we are going to keep as close to possible with time, but at the same time we would like you to ask questions. And one of the nice components of working in a webinar format is that you can submit questions at any time using the questions feature or the chat window, and we'll make sure that we can get to those either as we go along or in the Q&A section at the end. And even better, if we can't get to your question during the session itself, we'll make every effort to answer that in a follow-up. So as much as you would like to ask and put to the panelists in the next 45 minutes or so, please do. We will be sending everyone a copy of the slides that we're using today, so you can rest assured that you'll get a copy of the PDF of these slides in your email within a day or so, along with some other follow-up materials that will help you think further about product excellence. Kathy will be speaking a little bit further about the overall project of what the SIA is looking to accomplish, but a high-level understanding of the buyer-seller project is that we're really making an effort to come to mutual benefits for buyers and sellers. So the whole series of conversations that we've been having, including this one, is intended to help people on both sides of that relationship understand both themselves and the needs of the other side as well as possible, and to smooth that relationship over time. We will be asking polls at one point during the session to get a better understanding of what your interests are, and there's a fairly easy interface to select your option in the poll, so please be watching for that. And then in addition to the slides that you'll be receiving in follow-up, there will be a couple other pieces of information, other ways to get involved with the project, and things to be expecting in the next couple months. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kathy.
Great, thank you, Robin. The buyer-seller project is really a project that's done in partnership with the SIIA and the SLA, the Special Libraries Association. And Janice LaChance is on the phone, and who will be talking to us a little bit about the SLA. And with Free Pint, who really works with buyers and sellers, we're really excited to bring this whole line of programming to everybody, and I'm real anxious to hear your feedback. Quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with the SIIA, we are the principal trade association for the software and information industry. And in short, we promote the industry, we protect through advocacy, and we educate our member organizations to really help them achieve their business objectives. We're really organized into different groups, public policy, anti-piracy, and industry-focused divisions such as education technology, software services, content, financial, and public sector. And I am responsible for the content division, which really supports the media, publishing and information services companies, as well as the technology providers who sell into those particular companies. We support them through business and development and corporate development support. We educate on critical technology issues and trends, changes in business models, and as I said at the top, we advocate in Washington, D.C. For the many laws impacting our members to try and make sure that those laws accurately reflect what our membership organizations need. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Janice LaChance, who runs the SLA, to talk a little bit about the Special Libraries Association. Janice?
Thank you so much, Kathy, and Robin, thank you very much for your involvement. SLA is the professional home of information professionals, e-resource and content specialists, library directors, CI, KM pros, and more. We have 9,000 members in 75 countries, and our goal is very similar to SIIA's. We provide a network for those 9,000 members so that they can depend on each other for advice and resources when they have tough questions to answer from their organizations. We also provide continuing education, which is one of our primary services to them. We have a year-long webinar program and a number of face-to-face learning opportunities at our annual conference and at our leadership conference in February of 2013. And we are advocates and champions as well. We champion the profession, and we are advocates in the public policy arena on behalf of our members. We're very excited about this partnership and working with SIIA and FreePint on this effort. We recognize that our members need the tools that sellers provide to be successful in their jobs. Our members realize that. They appreciate the opportunity to interact. They appreciate the opportunity to see the sellers face-to-face at our conference every year. And opportunities like this are really helpful to them, as most of them are involved in evaluating, recommending, and many even have purchasing power over these decisions of which products to bring into their organizations. So this is a very exciting opportunity. We've had several events leading up to this, and they've all been successful. They're all a little bit different, and we hope to continue this learning and education process so that we can at some point have a constructive dialogue between the two groups and the two organizations. So we look forward to engaging on an ongoing basis.
Great. Thanks, Janice. So let's really get into the meat of what we're here to discuss today, which is product excellence. And this is a topic that I proposed originally to Kathy as something we could look at as part of the buyer-seller project, because as Kathy mentioned, FreePint works with both buyers and sellers in the industry, and what I often find is that we're talking almost as frequently with both sides of that relationship about excellence and what is product excellence. And yet the language that the sellers use is slightly different than the language that the buyers use when they refer to excellence. They're thinking about it differently, and they're thinking about what excellence is going to mean to their organizations a little bit differently. So as we move forward with trying to create and use excellent products, I thought it would be a really helpful piece for us to have more mutual understanding about what excellence is really all about. So feature or bug. One person's feature is another person's bug. And I certainly find this anytime I'm testing a product myself, that the more I understand about what the designer of that product was intending to do, the easier it is for me to understand how those features are put into place really to solve a particular problem. And so certainly within all of the product review work that FreePint does, we're always very careful to talk with the designer of that product about what was your intention, what were you trying to accomplish, what problem were you trying to solve. And that gives our researcher a much better perspective on how to test the product and how to highlight the things that it's really good at and how to highlight the things that perhaps it's not so strong. On the other hand, when I'm talking to buyers, they don't always have the luxury of being able to ask, what was your intention? They need to really understand and work to what their particular criteria are. And so they don't necessarily have the benefit of being able to ask that question and really test a product according to the publisher's intention. They really need to think about it and test it according to their own intentions. Another piece that we've started to notice in the last 6 months or so, and really is a trend that continues throughout any industry that's changing regularly, is that our expectations of excellence are continually changing. What satisfied in 2010 is no longer what satisfies today. And I think one of the key places we see a lot of this is in a fast-moving segment of the industry like mobile applications. In 2010, it was a big deal for a publisher simply to make their product or their application available in a mobile environment. That was meeting an expectation. And today, that's no longer a standard of excellence. That's simply an expectation that there will be some element of it available in a mobile environment. And that's just one example of how quickly expectations can change. I have a friend who recently shared with us that she had found her old Atari game system from the 1980s in her parents' house, and remembering how exciting it was to us to be able to play a video game back at that time. And of course today, what was an exciting game is pretty lame, and is something that most of us have kids that can do on their little iTouches. Really, most importantly, what we're looking for in terms of the expectation is that we're trying to be able to match needs with offerings and be able to really understand what's the need that we're trying to meet and how does this particular product meet that need with excellence. And that's another piece that we really need to be able to take a look at a lot of different perspectives to figure out. So the panelists that we've assembled here today are going to be able to address these questions from a number of different perspectives. But we're going to start by turning it over to Scott Livingston. Scott is with LexisNexis, as Kathy introduced him, and one of the reasons that I was particularly keen to have him participate in this session is that LexisNexis is often a winner of the CODI Awards, which is the SIIA's flagship program for awarding and honoring excellence in product design. So it seemed to make a lot of sense to invite Scott to come and talk a little bit about the LexisNexis approach to striving for excellence and how they are managing to pull together all those awards on the award shelf. So Scott?
Well, thank you very much, Robin, and good afternoon to everyone. I am speaking on behalf of LexisNexis, but based on conversations I've had with colleagues across the industry, I suspect that many of the content and solution providers have had a somewhat similar evolution in terms of how they try to understand customer need and interpret that into both content creation and product development. So what I'd like to do is use LexisNexis as a little bit of a case study, but suggest that in many respects it's sort of a proxy for what you see in the broader industry. LexisNexis in particular, many years ago, made a concerted effort to hire individuals into its product development team that came from our customers' base industries. So we were quite heavy with attorneys, with librarians, with former analysts, consultants, the folks that we were trying to sell to. And the philosophy at the time was, who knows better how to create a product than the individual who actually came from that particular industry. And the model of trying to understand the customer need and interpret that into product requirements was really multifaceted, but arguably somewhat narrow in focus. Product developers would have conversations with customers, with sales reps, would digest all that information and go off and build a product and take it out into the marketplace. That was in the 90s not necessarily an inappropriate model, but as the world has grown more complex, as product life cycles have shortened dramatically, as technology continues to leapfrog over itself, that does not allow for true and deep customer insight, and it doesn't allow for a nimble enough organization. So about 4 years ago, LexisNexis launched a program called Customer Discovery and Innovation. And this is really an internal market research arm within LexisNexis that we use to vet all new product concepts, as well as help identify new concepts out in the broader world. It really takes two major flavors. There's a team that handles quantitative analysis and a team that handles qualitative market research. And the choice is up to the product developer in terms of which of those two types of models they prefer to use. But essentially, the decision comes down to what are you really trying to achieve through the customer engagement. Qualitative market research tends to be quite useful in areas like feature functionality, UI design, user interface design and layout, specific functions that need to be included, how those functions operate, click-throughs, how the user actually engages with the product, that sort of hands-on interaction. Quantitative analysis for us tends to be much more useful when we're trying to spot real market trends, excuse me, or we're trying to understand the hidden opportunity spaces based on customers' current experiences, workflows, and alternative solutions in the market space. The quantitative and qualitative research is then synthesized through statistical analysis and helps us really narrow down our development efforts, at the end of the day providing a much more tailored product, much more likely to hit the mark in terms of customer expectation, often allowing us to exceed customer expectation, and in a much shorter development cycle than we had under our more traditional models. The system is actually, from our perspective, quite elegant in a number of different ways. The first is that for us it's a perpetual product management process, and so both new product ideas and base product are routinely put through this customer discovery and innovation model. For example, I am working right now with a traditional LexisNexis product looking at ID and password logins and how we might be able to improve that process for our customers. I'm using our customer discovery and innovation process to really sit out and engage with customers across a variety of market verticals and talk to them about how they log into the system, what their thoughts are around ID password structures, and testing out a couple of ideas that I've gathered both from sales, from our customer conversations, as well as the phone calls we received through sources like customer support, and really test out those concepts with some wireframes and some examples to help us understand a little better about what might be the optimal solution given technology as it exists today. The second major advantage for us is that this allows us to also, as I mentioned earlier, look for opportunity spaces. So we often can use this process to sit down and have conversations with customers about where things don't work well for them, even if it's outside of our core domain expertise, because that often highlights new development opportunities for us. And then we can take all that sort of feedback, validate it in the market as we're taking product out based on what we call voice of the customer. Again, direct conversation, our sales organization, and calls into our customer support teams to help us continue to iterate and refine the product lines. One of the things that we had talked about as a panel was what are the metrics that a publisher or a seller uses to try to evaluate whether or not they have achieved excellence and really hit the mark, or if there's room for additional development and opportunity. As a for-profit, revenue and sales are always one of those metrics that we look at. If we're fortunate and we do well and can generate good sales off of a new product, that is an indicator that we created an excellent product for the market. But revenue is not the be-all and end-all for us. We use a variety of other methodologies, most notably a system called Net Promoter Score that helps us really understand the customer's perspective on how closely we've come to hitting excellence and where the weak spots continue to be. For folks not familiar with Net Promoter, essentially we ask you, how likely are you to promote this product to a colleague or a friend, and why or why not? And based on that sort of output, we can begin to really understand where the strengths and weaknesses may be in a particular product and continue to iterate it through our innovation process. We also use, as I mentioned earlier, something called voice of the customer, and this is really an umbrella theory for us that pulls together calls into customer support, conversations that our customers have with our sales organization, direct conversations that I have with our sales organization, and other customer discovery and innovation market research that I may not have commissioned myself but may have inputs on my particular product line. And that really, again, helps us identify where things have gone really well for us and where there may be some room for additional development. lastly, one of the things we all keep an eye on on this side of the relationship is competitive responses. We know we've done a really good job when competitors try to move into this space as well. The way that the industry responds to a product you put in market is a very telltale sign about how effective it's actually been in meeting and delighting customer needs as well.
Right. So I think there's a real interesting way of thinking about what it is a publisher is trying to accomplish when it's striving for excellence in a product. And I think it speaks highly of what LexisNexis is doing and points to a very process-driven approach that it starts to suggest why they're so successful in achieving the awards for excellence. We really want to take a moment, though, to push the question back to you around what criteria sellers ought to be prioritizing when they're striving for excellence in product. And when I first sent a draft of this poll to the members of the panel, I'd actually had a completely different set of options to put here. I'd actually put in a set of options that were very feature-driven. And it really came out of what Scott presented, that features are really only one small piece of what excellence overall is and could look like. So I know this is a somewhat limited way of gathering information from you, but if you want to select the criteria here that you think is the most important one for sellers to strive for in creating excellent products, certainly baseline key features is one option, but there are other kinds of things that you might think are more important than that in striving for excellence. So what should really be the driving factor in helping sellers achieve excellence in their product lines? Take a minute or two to select your option, please. All right, we've got comments coming in. Please go ahead and select your option if you haven't yet. Another 5 seconds. All right, let's see what we've got here. So just to keep everyone, so you know what kind of scope we're talking about, we've got 50 people who are able to provide input here. And about half of these people feel that content, being comprehensive, valid, and appropriate, is the absolute most important criteria for sellers to look at in terms of excellence in their products. And that's not an entirely unexpected result. I mean, the quality of the content itself is an absolutely core piece of making sure that a product is exactly what a user can use. And it's also not surprising, especially given that the sponsor of the session of the whole buyer-seller project is the content division, where the focus of the work that we do within that portion of the SIIA is all about content and content products. So comprehensive, valid, and appropriate content. But also important is the ability of the customer to measure ROI. And this is a topic that's come up increasingly in the last 18 months or so around both buyers and sellers really wanting to be thinking hard about what does ROI look like for content investments, for product investments, and can we measure that? And I hear a lot of creative collaboration between buyers and sellers around what does that look like, and how can we make sure that at the end of the day buyers are able to really justify and continue to invest in quality content products. Scott, what do you sort of take away first glance at this as a very unscientific way of getting information, but what do you see here in terms of the responses that we've gotten from the group?
Well, I'd say, Robin, I completely agree with your assessment around content, and it's not surprising, and I think it's quite appropriate. I mean, content is the foundation of research products, and substandard content by definition means substandard products. So I very much am not surprised and agree with sort of that assessment. I do think ROI is continuing to become a much more important metric, both for the builder and the buyer of the solution. So that one also makes an enormous amount of sense to me. The future needs one was quite interesting to me because as a builder of product, we spend an enormous amount of time focusing quite heavily on where not only the customer is today, but where they'll be in 2 or 3 years. And so it's interesting to note the relatively low percentage on that one. But that may be simply a factor more of us as builders needing to have a multi-year window to ensure the product has viability over the long term, as opposed to a real disconnect between the two sides of the relationship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I've just had a couple of comments come through from members of the audience who have both made comments, similar kind of comment, that the content itself is a given, and if we're even going to consider a product good, let alone excellent, you got to have that content there, and similarly with the key features. And both of these respondents are saying that one of the reasons they didn't select, it seems like they're saying one of the reasons they didn't select those as the most important criteria is that's their baseline expectation. And then if we're going to hit excellence, we need to be able to do some of these other things like measure ROI, exceed expectations, and evolve for future needs. So that's another way to think about it.
Yeah, I like that quite a bit. That makes a great deal of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's now move on to taking a look from some of the buy-side folks on the call. With buyers, as I said in my initial comments, excellence is always in context of what it is you're trying to do. If from the sell side, excellence is in the context of what the intention is. From the buy side, excellence is in the context of what the overall information philosophy looks like and what the overall portfolio looks like, and also even the context of making the purchase itself, who's involved and what is it that they're looking for in order to evaluate a product to be excellent, good enough, or not making the grade. In today's organizations, there are a lot of different people involved in content purchases and content evaluation, and one of the minor factors in making a purchase or using a product may be what the actual end user really, really wants. There may be a number of different people who are involved in influencing that decision or making that decision based on other kinds of relationships, based on other elements of the organizational philosophy. And we're going to take a look at 2 organizations that are very different in terms of their size and scope, but do provide a couple of good case studies for thinking about how product excellence fits within the context of the buying organization. So we'll start with 2 representatives from Ernst & Young, Anne and Cindy, if you'd like to share with us what you've got.
All right. This is Ann Kenny, and I am responsible for acquired external content. And our overall philosophy at our organization is the right content at the right time and for the right price, meaning our organization is a global organization, so content portfolio sets include what does everybody need on a global basis: news information, company information, executive information, and what do we deploy there. We then have the different communities within the organization that have more boutique focus needs, so that's more of the 20%, and that's limited access, putting the content into the hands of only those people who can obtain the most value from that access. We also are very cognizant of overloading our people, so minimizing resource overload, not having multiple content sets or resources deployed to them that have similar content sets, because then the question becomes, well, when do I go here and when do I go there? And that's confusing to them, and it also addresses the minimizing duplication wherever possible, although in our global organization we find it very difficult to eliminate duplication 100%. every purchase, it has an identified stakeholder who champions that purchase. And the interesting thing is that champion may not be the actual ultimate funder of the resource, but it is a stakeholder in the service line areas who are championing that for us. We look at content to be delivered in multiple formats, whether it be through our portal, whether it be customized data files, whether it be web access with self-registration. So we're constantly looking at how is this going to be deployed, and if we can't figure out how to deploy it, we're not inclined to want to purchase it. And then the priority is always given to our client engagement. As a professional service organization, our clients are what's key to us, and we have excellence in client service delivery, so therefore we need to have the content sets that support that and puts that into the hands of those engagement teams to provide our external clients with the best service possible.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Cindy, was there anything that you wanted to add on that?
I was just going to explain a little bit about how we purchase content at Ernst & Young. We've got a unique approach, and the actual purchase is managed by two primary groups at EY, and we both work very closely together. That's the Acquired Content team, which Ann manages, and my External Content Global Procurement team. As I said, it's very unique, and I know often people hear the word procurement and they want to run in the opposite direction. And being a procurement professional, I might tend to agree with you on certain levels. However, I want to explain a little bit about how we operate as a cohesive team and how we're very successful with our content acquisition. Ann's team is a team of information professionals who have specialized knowledge in different areas and geographies, and they take the primary responsibility, as Ann has explained, in identifying resources, working with end users and specific groups within the organization to assist with the overall evaluation of content needs. My team are 4 members located in different geographical areas, and we have over 10 years experience purchasing only external content. We're recognized as a specific procurement category. We don't buy office supplies, furniture, or even hardware or software. And we work only with our external content vendors. We work very closely with Ann and her team to negotiate contract terms, specific license rights, global pricing. We help to ensure that all the internal policies are followed. And then, most importantly, we manage that vendor relationship throughout the term of the contract, making sure that we can leverage the relationship for whatever we need, be that more content, more functionality, analyst time, different deployment methods, and so on. And we continue to work with Ann's team to make sure that all of the needs are addressed. And you know, I can say myself, some of my relationships go back for as long as I've been with Ernst & Young, which is almost 14 years. And I think that that's really important as we look, you know, for the excellent product. And as Ann mentioned, it's important. We don't do this in a vacuum. We work with the appropriate end users, stakeholders, budget holders, Q&RM, whoever needs to be at the table to make that decision as to what is the appropriate product. And we have executive level support throughout Ernst & Young helping us do this.
Great, thank you. And I remember when we had the panel call to do the planning, I mean, and I know from my own experience working with Ernst & Young compared with working with some other organizations that also have procurement teams involved with external content procurement, is that it really is an advantage to have a content procurement team who understands the complexities of digital content and what you might want to be looking for or working on within the context of that, as opposed to even acquiring software, which you'd think would be reasonably similar, but I imagine is really quite a bit different when you actually get down to the details of acquiring it and what makes a good product, but also what makes a good fit for your organization.
Absolutely.
Okay. So with a different type of view on product excellence and context, I'm going to turn over to Ann Northcott, who is with the Export Development Canada. Ann?
Thanks, Robin. I'm the head of the library for Export Development Canada, and all of our purchasing of content is done through our shop. So we have a very solid philosophy in terms of what we're looking for when we are purchasing content. And some of those criteria include things such as reducing duplication. We're constantly looking to make sure that every one of our subscriptions has something new or unique to offer to our end users. And as a result, we've worked really hard over the last year or two to filter out those products which don't offer something unique in one way or another. We also look very, very closely to see what our competitors in the financial arena are buying. And it could be partners or it could be our competitors as well, because our goal is to be able to level the playing field for our end users. So we're constantly doing benchmarking and talking with our peers and other organizations to see what's going on. Another feature that we're looking for as well is, wherever possible, trying to aggregate content through one portal to try and create more of those one-stop shops for our customers, because we realize that whether they get it free from Google or whether through one of our paid subscriptions, it doesn't mean anything to our end users. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible. So if we can have a more portal-like experience through any of our products, then that makes it that much easier. We also look for added value from our products. So another example would be having analyst access. If a product has that, it's something that makes it perhaps more competitive or more in our advantage to purchase than a similar product that doesn't. We're also hot and heavy into things such as plugins, Excel plugins, for example, to allow for increased end-user efficiencies. We're constantly looking for productivity gains for our end users, and just trying to do more with less as well. So if we can find a product that does it all, that's absolutely terrific. Reliability and consistency in information. So a simple thing like, if we're looking at a company financial database, is it the legal name of the entity used throughout in a consistent manner? And then obviously vendor reputation, reliability, transparency with pricing as well. Very, very key with us. In terms of which departments or divisions within EDC are responsible for helping us with these purchasing decisions, we actually start from the end user. They're involved in the evaluation of existing subscriptions. So we gather their business need, we find what end products do they funnel this information into, and we do this as well with new subscriptions. They have to justify to us what the business need is so we can make a better determination for purchase as well. Our librarians form a relationship with the vendor to gain a better understanding of their product development, the content, the training offerings that they have as well. With new subscriptions, they'll seek out new products which may be competitors to our existing subscriptions, and then they'll do a trial or a comparison. And they also are empowered to manage the budget for their portfolio of subscriptions to enable them just to make those decisions as to whether a new subscription can even be added or whether existing ones can be expanded. The librarians will take the first crack at reviewing the contract to make sure certain standard terms are appearing in the contract, and they will make suggestions actually for changes to those contracts. And when it becomes a little bit more complex, they'll liaise with our legal departments and our procurement department as well. The library manager, so that's me, I manage the overall budget, and I anticipate and forecast the spend. I make sure that the collection of all of our subscriptions are managed holistically, so we know what value each of our product brings and how it compares to one another regardless of format. And I'll be brought in for price negotiation if there's a problem in some area, and then I'll also work with legal and procurement if there's a complicated or troublesome account. We do pull in department managers and directors and so on to make them aware of their team spend, what their team has access to, and so on. And as I mentioned, we do work closely with procurement because they're the ones that sign the contracts. They'll do a review of the contracts, and then ultimately they'll issue the purchase order as well.
Great, thanks, Anne. We had a question come through before we move on to this next portion about identifying a need that I think I'd like to throw over to both Anne and Cindy from Ernst & Young as well, around the funding model for all this. I mean, it's a big piece of stakeholder involvement, and it's also a big piece of what the procurement itself looks like. Whether you have funded by, in a large organization, by specific research groups, putting that question to Ernst & Young, but then also the same question to Anne Northcott around EDC. Where does the funding come in, and who sets those budgets both on a global level and for individual products? Cindy, let's start with you.
Sure. We do have a centralized knowledge budget for certain purchases, those being things that are primarily used across the firm or by our team of researchers within knowledge, but also there are specific groups within Ernst & Young, different service lines who have their specialized needs, and they will also fund those types of purchases. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, but it is my responsibility working with Anne to make sure that we have all of those budget approvals up front before we start negotiating with our vendors. So that's really an important part of our process.
And the other piece of the puzzle with funding is we have the global, we have the service lines, but then there's also local country spends, resources they buy specifically in their native language or that support their specific regulatory environment, and that country actually will fund it in order to have access to it.
And Anne, how about at ADC?
At EDC, all of the purchase of secondary information is centralized through my shop, and what I'll do is make recommendations to our executive as to where I think the budget needs to be, and then I'll receive either approval or not. But I'm very, very lucky in that I have the chance to have the conversation with our users to find out what their needs are and then make recommendations.
So a perfect segue into the next portion, which is looking at needs and understanding what the process is for spotting gaps. Just as vendors are changing all the time and responding to the environment, buyers are changing all the time, and their organizations are changing all the time. So the types of information they need, the content they need is going to evolve as well. Looking at what types of formal processes you have for evaluating products and looking at them both prior to acquisition as well as at renewal time. Let's first take a look at Ernst & Young.
Well, we have a very formalized process for identifying the content needs going forward, whereas the organizational strategies and priorities are announced and defined. We take those strategies and priorities and align them with our existing portfolio set, identify potential gaps. So if a geographical area specifically is going to become a priority for us, we assess what coverage we have for that geographical area and then figure out where the gaps are and what potential additional content sets we can purchase from existing vendors or have to go explore whole new vendors in that area. We have a number of experienced hires that come into our organization, and because of that they come with favored resources that they've used in previous positions. So we find ourselves having a lot of conversations with them about what they had been using, what we presently have, where they are seeing some gaps. We have new client service offerings. As the firm develops its offerings, we take a look at the details around those offerings and again work with the practice group that has developed that offering on what their intent was, aligning what we presently have, identifying the gaps. We participate in a number of professional organizations such as knowledge organizations, but also a number of other kinds of organizations, industry specific, regulatorily specific, business process specific. So we participate in those to have those discussions to understand what's going on in the marketplace and what potential resources there may be. And we also have rely on our vendors. Our vendors are very good at telling us about their new product sets, which then starts the conversation to take it one step further. Okay, that's interesting, but it really doesn't meet our needs. But it does trigger what we really need is this, and so it allows the back and forth conversation with the sellers so that we can help kind of guide them on where our needs are.
Right. And
So
Anne,
that's what
over
we
at
do to identify the gaps.
mm-hmm. And over at EDC, Anne, how about you?
We do a lot of what Ernst & Young does as well. So our librarians work with the end users to identify where they're struggling to find information, and we work with the group. We interact and interview the groups that are responsible for our corporate plan and something that we have called an environmental scan very early on in the process to make sure that we're always aware of where our organization is heading in terms of target markets and industries, so that in turn we can go back and assess our collection to make sure that we can meet the demand. When we do identify a gap, we have what we call a wish list spreadsheet where the librarians will identify potential new subscriptions that we may be interested in, or perhaps a new module that we want to add on to an existing subscription. And then we rank them according to priority based on corporate mandate. We put the price in to compare it to our budget, and we do this quarterly to determine which subscriptions can be purchased, if at all.
Great. So in the interest of time, I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for questions. We did have another poll that we were planning on doing at this point, but I think rather than doing it in the session, I'll send you the options on the poll as part of the follow-up, and you can think about the most important factors you think should be present in acquiring or licensing projects in organizations. I have a couple of final questions for for all of our panelists, but at the same time I do encourage you to add your questions into the questions pane, and we'll make sure that we get to those, if not during the session itself, then in follow-up. Wanted to first start by throwing it back to Scott. You've heard a lot about what matters in organizations. Were there any surprises to you as a publisher, as a seller? You've certainly been in this a long time and from a number of different perspectives, so perhaps there's nothing that's really surprising. But what did you hear perhaps really highlighted by what Ernst & Young and EDC present around what they consider to be excellent product and the acquisition process for excellent product?
Well, thanks, Robin. I think that's a great question. I don't know that there was anything that I would say was overly surprising to me. What I was very pleased to hear in the conversation was the sophistication in the methodologies that the organizations are using in evaluating research solutions, and that level of sophistication, I think, in some ways mirrors what a lot of the companies on the vendor side are doing in terms of trying to become more sophisticated in how they create feature functionality requirements, content requirements, etc. And it seems to me that one of the places that might be a really interesting point for future conversation are ways that we can bring our respective methodologies more closely together, since both types of organizations are in many respects essentially running down similar types of questions, and greater information share sort of across the relationship may actually produce superior product than what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. So let's start by asking the buyers that we have on our panel around variables that you're considering today that were perhaps not part of your, not even part of your experience or your radar, say, 4 years ago. Are there new things that you're looking for in terms of excellence?
Well, this is Anne from Ernst & Young, and from my point of view, or from our organization's point of view, there is much more of a drive towards a primary core tool for a specific practice or service line, and then supplementing that based on additional needs like industry-focused material or more analytical, but having one core tool that it's deployed to everybody in the practice. It helps with sharing of workload. It helps with different countries who may come together on a specific engagement, always talking apples to apples as opposed to apples and oranges if they're using multiple tools. So I'm finding that our organization is more receptive to that idea than they ever have been in the past.
Can you give any sort of more example? I know you might not be able to name specific things, but anything that you could name as a type of implementation in that area? I know what you're talking about, but I think it'd be helpful to hear how it plays out for you.
Yeah, if we have a service line that assessed a number of capital markets tools, desktop solutions for the analysis of different kinds of industry and company financial data. And they went through a year-long process of assessing all the major players in that area, and they actually made a decision to choose one vendor to deploy to everybody at the desktop. So everybody in that practice has that one tool, and they can now share work so much easier now.
I do want to ask Ann Northcott the same question, but before I do that, I actually want to bring this same concept to Scott, because I know that this is a big piece of where a lot of product development strategies are heading. Is that something that you see really LexisNexis continuing to push forward with?
Well, it's a really interesting challenge. So certainly we have seen in every industry vertical we operate in a greater shift towards what I'll call sort of sole provider or primary provider, particularly around core research functions based on the organization's industry and sort of key mission. The sort of interesting corollary is at the same time, I think through a variety of sort of external forces, the idea of ever greater personalization and customization is also a fairly strong market dynamic. And so it's a really interesting exercise for companies like mine to figure out how one can essentially be a one-stop shop and yet very customized to unique needs within individual geographies, individual language sets, individual workflows, and personal preferences. And so it's a very fascinating space, but there is quite a bit of tension, I think, in that area right now.
Yeah. So Ann Northcott, I'd like to...
Where,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, and that's where the ability for the seller to be very nimble with their products, to add in and credential to only certain groups and swap in and swap out so much easy is so much more of value to an organization like Ernst & Young.
So Ann Northcott, I'd like to ask you the same question about variables or criteria that you're looking at today around product excellence that perhaps you weren't looking at a couple of years ago.
I have to say the deployment of iPads in our organization has really factored heavily in how our end users are working. So there are enormous limitations of how our users can easily access content through a Citrix-like system, and that's resulted in an increased demand for direct app access to our subscriptions. That wasn't even on our radar 2 years ago, and that's increasingly taking up our time now. Things like enhanced interface functionality with plugins, and just more demands as we expand globally. But I'm going to have to say that the mobile factor has really knocked us for six. And although we tried to prepare for it, we didn't realize the extent of the impact that would have when we're looking for content to fill people's gaps.
Absolutely. There have been quite a number of questions that have come in. I'm going to pass it over to Kathy to moderate some of these. We are coming up on the top of the hour, and we're happy to stay open for another 5-8 minutes. If you're available to continue with us, please do. We will try to get to as many of the questions as we can. Doesn't look like Kathy has actually received the questions I sent her, so I will go through them. Let me just try that one more time. So if you do need to leave, that's fine, but you will be receiving all the follow-up materials afterwards. And let me also reiterate the other ways to be involved. There's the coding event that I mentioned earlier. It's the flagship program for the SIA's at recognizing excellence. Kathy, do you want to speak briefly about the opportunity to be involved with the CODIs?
Great. Thank you, Robin. The SIIA Cody Awards, and you can find out more information by going to www.siia.net and click on a link to get over to the Cody site. It's now in its 28th year, and it's the only program that recognizes excellence in the information industry by your industry peers. And this year for the content categories, there's 28 categories, and these range from best legal information provider, best science and technology information provider, best business information resource, to other categories such as best editorial outsourcing solution, best search platform, or even best e-commerce and billing platform. There's a wide range of categories that many companies compete in, and I'd encourage everybody, if you are a supplier, to nominate your product. If you're a buyer of these products, we also are accepting judge applications. The deadline is in a mere 2 weeks on September 28th, so if you are interested, I'd encourage you to get over to the Cody Awards site and submit your application. And then by all means, feel free to reach out to me, KG Sexton, KGSEXTON at SIIA.net if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to help you.
We also have an upcoming webinar in November that's going to take another look at the excellence in product, but from the perspective of really evaluating. And it's going to pick up on the process of judging for the Codys, so really talking with people who do product evaluations about how do you really test a product to determine its excellence and how well it fits for you, as well as from the publisher point of view, how you can position your products well during the evaluation stage, whether prior to an initial acquisition or for renewal, so that you can really make sure that your product is putting its best foot forward. We do also have a mailing list for the project, the buyer-seller project, so you'd like to be notified about upcoming events. As a registrant for the session, you will receive upcoming information on any other events, but if it's something that you find helpful, would like to pass along pass along the opportunity to any colleagues, please feel free to do so. I have passed a couple of statements that I'd like to see if our panelists have any further comments on based on what some of our respondents have said. And I passed to you a comment from one person who said that they're looking to integrate output from some products to a number of other different types of services. Is this something that you're also looking at doing? Is it something that you look for in products, or is it not as relevant to your needs?
What we do at EDC, we have a certain range of products where, and I hope this is what the asker is looking for, where we want to take that content and deliver the information into some of our systems for further analysis. And what we're looking for there are very similar types of content, qualities such as good content, usable, reliable, and so on, but then compatibility with existing systems such as SharePoint, for example, or perhaps one of our modeling systems. So I hope that's what they were asking for, but when we're looking at something like that, it adds another layer of complexity, and that it has to have compatibility and ease of transferal of information. Mm-hmm. And usually it's spitting it then into some sort of analytical end product that our clients would be using.
Okay, great. And I'd like to, just one final question before we let everyone go, because we are running past the top of the hour. Scott, we had a comment from one participant in the session around the fact that the excellence of the product itself is only one piece of excellence in the relationship, and how the vendor has its reputation in the field and its ability to respond to customer service. I mean, how do you build all of that into the product experience and really make sure that you're presenting not just the product in an excellent light, but have an excellent relationship as a corporate entity?
Well, I think that's a terribly insightful observation, and I couldn't agree with it more. In fact, it's one of the areas that at least LexisNexis has invested quite heavily in probably about the last 18 months or so. So I mentioned that we have a customer discovery and innovation group that actually helps with identifying and refining the product lines itself. About 18 months ago, we launched a separate group within the company called our go-to-market team, and this set is charged with the actual delivery of the product into the customer market, and post-delivery support. And so they're really identifying best practices, process improvements, et cetera, to help ensure that a really good product doesn't start to suffer because of missteps as we take it into the market space. And I think many providers in our area are beginning to put a lot more emphasis on how we take something to market, not just what we take to market.
Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. There are a couple more questions we just don't have time for, but we will do everything we can to respond to some of these in the follow-up pieces, or bring them back to the next webinar, or submit them as possible topics for upcoming buyer-seller project events. Kathy and Janice, I'm going to turn it back to you briefly to say any final thank yous, and I appreciate the opportunity to help put this together for you.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to reach out to myself, to Robin, or to Janice. Janice, anything you'd like to say?
I just want to say thank you to everyone. The panel was terrific. Scott, Ann, Cindy, the two Anns, and Ann and Scott and Cindy and Robin did a great job as always moderating. So I want to thank all of you for doing this and sharing your experiences. And we'll look forward to the next event to get together again. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Great.
That's great. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.